That lady gets on my nerves. Okay, we are learning Shaar Daled Perek Chavav, and let me review quickly what he says, and I'd like to tell you, go a little bit over what we talked about last week, but then a little deeper, and then a little deeper to get to a point where I don't even know what I'm talking about, but I just wanted to share it, some inyanim of Kabbalah. But in Perek Chavav, the Nefesh Hachaim, where he continues this theme of the world can't live without Torah. Somebody asked, not just Torah, but important to know, Limud Torah. Like could be there's this Torah in the world, but nobody's learning it, but that doesn't do anything. You need the Limud Torah. And he tells us that a little bit in there, I'm going to go back to the beginning, but I just want to get the key sentence here. In Perek Chavav, Gamim hayu chas v'sholom kol Yisrael menichin v'oizvin mili yispalo lo yisparach, that you can't compare, a few words earlier, Mashenken b'chol ha-mitzvahs afilu b'mitzvahs ha-tefillah. You can't compare Torah to mitzvahs or even tefillah. So you have three things, Torah, tefillah, and mitzvahs. Different things. Because even if God forbid, the whole world would stop davening, the world would not return to a state of tohu vavohu. I spoke about this, that tefillah is chayei shah. It doesn't necessarily bring chiyus into the world. And the way I explain chayei shah and chayei olam is not that you're working in temporary things as opposed to permanent things, but you're working only in this world, if you will, instead of, that's chayei shah, the world we live in, the world we see, touch, and feel, as opposed to working in the greater world of chayei olam. Divrei Chazal, chayei shah v'atorah nikras chayei olam. So we were speaking, and this is where what I'd like to just elaborate on a little bit. We're speaking on the difference between Torah and mitzvahs. Torah and mitzvahs. So I mentioned before, which I think is, I think it's my chiddush, but it's an important one. And that is that there's an essential difference between Torah and mitzvahs. Not like he's a shomer Torah mitzvahs. There's essential difference between Torah and mitzvahs. And the difference is, in halacha, you see that when it comes to learning Torah, or better, teaching Torah, so besides for learning Torah, Talmud Torah, Keneged Kulam, but teaching Torah, there's halachas of Talmud Torah, teaching Torah. And in the halachas of teaching Torah, there's dinim like mahu b'chinam, afato b'chinam. Like Hashem teaches for free, you need to teach for free. So what are you supposed to do for Parnasa if you're a teacher of Torah? So the answer is schar batola. Chazal came up with an idea of schar batola, that you get paid the amount that you could have made if you weren't teaching. But be'etzem, Torah has to be taught for free. And we never found this idea of chinam, free, by anything but Torah. For instance, we don't tell a sefer like, you're really not supposed to charge. Or a person does mitzvahs, you're really not supposed to charge. There's no din of mahu b'chinam, avata b'chinam by mitzvahs. There's only a din of teaching for free. This is one of many halachas. That din only applies to Torah. Why? So the answer is very simple. But Torah is coming from up to down, and mitzvahs are coming from down to up. Torah is what Hashem does, istako baraisa ubara alma, and mitzvahs is what we do, our obligation as Jewish humans. So what it means is that when Hashem is being mishtelshel, the Torah into this world, we have to try to become part of that hishtelshelus. we have to become part of that, a link in the chain of bringing the Torah from a high place to a low place. In this case, we're Shaliach Hashem. Torah is coming from Shamayim into this world, and we're part of that. Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai Masr Yeshua. We're part of that Messiah, but we're Shliach Hashem. Since we're Shliach Hashem, we have to do it the same way God does it. Mahu b'chinam, afato b'chinam. Mitzvos are what humans are supposed to do. You're not being part of a link, part of a chain, a link in a chain, in the hishtalshus of bringing Torah to this world. We are reacting and behaving as Jewish men and women should behave, and that's by doing mitzvahs. One is not less important or more important. However, I just want to point out there's a difference, an essential difference in direction between the Torah, which is coming from a high place to a low place, to mitzvahs, which we are going from a low place to a high place. And then there's tefillah, which is in between. You see, it's interesting that, like part of the bracha we make on Torah is v'chaya olam nata b'seichenu, right? Shebachar b'anu mikol am v'nasa lanu es Torah. We talk about chaya olam nata b'seichenu, that we are the shliach Hashem. Hashem chose us. Bachar b'anu mikol amim v'nasa lanu es Torah. And then v'chaya olam nata b'seichenu, he gave us this gift, so we can be mamshich, Avram Avinu, Moshe Rabbeinu, everybody here, we can be mamshich, this Indian of giving Torah into the world. So you see that there's an essential difference between Torah and mitzvahs. I think, by the way, if this makes any sense to you, whereas Torah is the chain being dropped into this world, or let's call this a chain of light being dropped into this world, and mitzvos is what we do with it now that it's dropped. We put on tefillin, we have a mezuzah, we do chesed. That's what we do in this world. Tefillah, davening, is accessing the chain. It's not the chain going up or the chain going down. It's accessing that chain and understanding, as I spoke about last week, that everything in this world has also a kesher to the world of Yitzira, the world of Bria, the world of Atzilus, and the world of Hashem. So we're not just, it's not that we're bringing God into our world or we're bringing our world into God. We're accessing the chain. We're recognizing with tefillah that everything comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and everything is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're going up and down the chain like Yaakov Avinu. Malachi Elokim Olam V'Yardim Ba. But what's the Ba? The Ba is the chain itself. So that's the chain that's being dropped, is the chain of Or and the chain of Torah. Everybody with me so far? That's I think a chiddush, but that's I believe the pashut of Shaar. Just shut off my.
What could you explain what it means to access the chain?
What I understand of accessing the chain is taking a momentary recognition of the fact when we daven that the world doesn't begin and end in my office or in my house. There's a whole marechet here which is going on, part of which we see and feel, part of which we can understand, part of which we can't understand. So the tefillah is a sort of a hispatlus to that chain. So meaning that by recognizing this, and this we're told that by recognizing the union of tefillah, by recognizing the connection to everything that happens here to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world, so we're getting the world perhaps on a deeper level. There's more gilui in the world, and that's what happens with tefillah. If you're medayik, by the way, in the lashonis of tefillah, that's all it is. You know what I have. Baruch Aleinu Hashem Elokeinu es Hashana Azosh ves kol minei svuas u'lateva. That the bracha comes from Shamayim, goes right into the crop, right? Reva Yenu V'Riva Rivenu Golenu Meher Laman Shemecha. Everything is coming from Reva Yenu Hashem. Golenu is Malchus, which is in this world. So that's an important yesod. And a different brachas, different snuos, different kavanas. Some mitzvahs you have to do, but normally Rav Shimon Bar Yochai taught that the chaye Olam is Torah. Hayesha is tefillah.
Just clarify, please. The chain coming down is the Torah. Our mitzvahs is our response back up, and tefillah is accessing that chain. Is that what you said?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Rav Haber,
Yeah.
is it possible to say that like the Hisarusa de la Ila and Hisarusa de la Tata, the chain, or that there are escalators going both directions, but that either tefillah or perhaps kavana in mitzvahs, l'shem shamayim in limud Torah, puts the limud Torah on the escalator, your limud Torah, and the kavana in mitzvahs, it could be a tefillah, yehi ratzon before a mitzvah, puts your mitzvah on the escalator going up. That the accessing of the chain, the tefillah has a very practical consequence. It transforms the limud Torah into what limud Torah should be, and mitzvahs into what mitzvahs should be.
Okay, good. But the main point here, you're correct, is all correct. But the main point here that I'm making, I believe the Nefesh Hachaim is making, is that when we talk about Torah, we're talking about the actual creation of the world. This is how God gets his light into the world. This is how the tzimtzum happens through Torah. So
you emphasized limud Torah earlier. So the Torah is the chain, seemingly without any kind of limud on our part.
That's right. Well, it's a chain, but it doesn't touch ground unless we make it touch ground. And the only way it touches ground is by actually learning it. Like on a very gashmiistic level, you can understand it would be like having the chachma available to us. It's like lahavdol, it's like you have Google, but you can't bring it. Nobody's reading it. You could have the best svarim in your house, but nobody's learning them. So what you have a chain, but you're not bringing that chain into this world. Let me just explain something very simple, which I'm sure you all know, that the way because it's important for the terms here, when Hashem created the world, what was the first thing he created? Come on, somebody wake up. What was it?
5 hours.
Right.
No, light.
Light. V'ha'aretz haisatayu v'avayu. Bereishis bar halakim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz. V'ha'aretz, like you said, shamayim v'ha'aretz. V'ha'aretz haisatayu v'avayu. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Yehi Ar. So the Toyu v'avayu wasn't pre-creation. Like, make no mistake. I don't know what was their pre-creation. That we don't know about. All we can know a little bit about is what the Torah starts telling us about. So that's what we don't know anything about is, okay, well, what was there before there was Toyu v'avayu? But let's talk from Toyu v'avayu on. That's where our chronology of history begins. Toyu v'avayu, in simple English, means a balagan. Toyu v'avayu, confusion, mixture of darkness and light, mixture of good and evil. Everything was all mixed up. And then as Hashem created the world, as the Mekubalim say, and the Maral says at the beginning of Avos and in many places, began the Alma de Peruda. This is the Zoyar and Parak Beis Abrasius. Alma de Peruda means very simply, let's say this probably means something very deeply, but the simple understanding of Alma de Perud, is when you sort something out. So like if somebody would give me a pile of coins, if I'm a coin collector and he gives me a pile of coins, some of them, the pennies are worth a penny, some of the pennies are worth $1,000. So like the avodas ha'adam is to sort them out. Whoa, I found an Indian head penny, blah, blah, blah. So the Alma de Peruda means that as Hashem created the world, he put it all there. That was called Toyu v'avayu. And then sorted out, Yehi Or, there would be Mayim, Vayivadlu, Mayim Lamayim, and Bein Aretz Lamayim, and everything started to, every blade of grass ended up being separated out. Even Adam Arishon was Adam and Chava, and then it got piruda. What does that mean in a simple shot? It means to say that the purpose of creation is to be mafrid between or and chayshach, and between toiv and ra. And like a person who's a Talmud Chacham and a Lamdan knows how to distinguish between things. Like the yikr of a Lamdan, difference in a Lamdan and a person who learns a lot of Gemara, is the ability to be distinguished between matters. That's exactly what the Gemara does, by the way. The Gemara takes everything and tries to Dvarim, the lashon of the Maretz Chayes is Dvarim hadoime bedinim Dvarim hadoimim b'mahusam u'mischalkim b'dinehem. Like, what's the difference between this and that? It's always about what the difference is. So, like, to understand this on a very gashmius level, without Torah, and I'd like to take it a bit deeper, but I just want to say this, that with may darga ladarga, without Torah, the world is toyu vavayu. Without some kind of a system, it's not just this mystical or coming into the world, but without, on the simplest level, without some kind of a system of knowing what's good and what's bad, and what's dark and what's light, like in the Chumash it says, Re'ei nasati lifneichem hayom es habracha v'es haklala. So the mitzvah there is Re'ei, just be able to tell the difference, for heaven's sakes, between bracha and klala, because so one man's bracha is another man's klala. But like, understand, like, this is an avodah for us. We have to understand Re'ei. The mitzvah there is Re'ei. The operative word is Re'ei, meaning you should be able to know, be able to see. Hashem is telling us, behold. You should be able to see the difference between toiv and ra, between bracha and klala. So like I say, on the simplest level, without Torah, you've got balagan. Balagan's called toyu vavayu. So comes Chazal and says, look, if there were, this is the Nefesh Hachaim, the name of Chazal. If there wouldn't be mitzvahs, the world wouldn't. That's terrible, chas v'shalom. We wouldn't be doing our tachlis in this world. But you can't say that the world would go back to toyu vavayu. Meaning, if there would be Torah without mitzvahs, at least we would have the clarity to know the difference between or and chayshach and bracha and klala and toiv and ra. However, if there's no Torah, then the world goes back to toyu vavayu. In its simplest pshat, the whole creation was for naught. The whole creation, all the distinctions that are made and all the decisions we need to make. In life, we don't have a derech, we don't have a mahalach. It's just basically, we would be like animals. You're hungry, you eat. There's not an ethical system. There's not a Torah system. So when we understand Torah coming from a high place to a low place, without that, so the world is chayzer l'toyu vavayu. And also, like, I just want to say, like, there's hundreds of chazalim that are Moira Ladovers there, but like the Gemara says, like, a simple thing as an example: Kol dayan shadon din emes la mitay nasa shutav la kadosh baruch hu b'ma'aseh bereishis. Yeah, what's the pshat? Why all of a sudden this guy, as opposed to the sheichet, because he became a dayan, he's a shutav with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The answer is that the shutav means that you're involved in the ma'aseh bria. That's what the whole thing means. And when you're a dayan, all right, two people come in front of you, you're a dayan, and this one says ani mitzasiya, but this one says ani mitzasiya, right? This was shnai moichsen betalos. So what happens is, when the dayan is sorting it out and saying, oh, this is right and this is wrong and this is the din and this is emes, he becomes a shutav to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the sense that he's being mashlim the bria and creating a clarification in an or that wouldn't be. If the dayan is putting on tefillin, we don't necessarily see that that's nasa shutav l'HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right, says tefillin, but I'm not diminishing. I'm just explaining the difference between Torah and tefillah. So, okay, everyone with me so far? I want to go to the next step. So the first step here is that one's coming up and one's going down and one's coming up. One is part of the Bria and the Or of the Bria, or the Or Eitzaif coming into this world, and one is our reaction to it. Let's leave tefillah aside because it's a sort of an in-between thing, but the Nefesh Hachaim says afilu tefillah. But this is the essential difference between Torah and mitzvahs. That's the essential difference. And the difference is that when Torah, you're going further, Asher bara Elokim lasos, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, okay, I've made the whole world, I've distinguished the whole world for you. I've made a difference between Or and Choshech and Mayim. However, Asher bara Elokim lasos, now it's your turn to continue the Bria. And how do you, so we're actually continuing the Bria by learning Torah. Just the Torah hanging out there on chain is not going to do it. That's just for us to access. But by giving the Torah further, hence you have the halacha mahu b'chinam of atzatiyah b'chinam. To take it a little bit into
I'm sorry, Rabbi, but just to summarize in my own simple mind. So the difference is that by the chain, we're just accessing something that exists. With Torah, we're adding something.
That's right, adding a link.
Adding, okay.
Well said. Now, let me be a little bit brave, and I got to believe that if the Nefesh Hachaim quotes something Kabbalistic, we're supposed to try to understand it. But in Perek Chavav, shouldn't be like like when we get to a Gemara, when we get to a Gadato, we skip it. That's the part of Shas. So in Perek Chavav, the first paragraph, why is it that the world can't exist without Torah? It says the Nefesh Hachaim. Let's learn it together inside. Taimus shel davar k'moshe kasav nulel. I already wrote this in Perek Yud and again in Perek Yud Aleph. Shemakor shorsha ha'elyon hanelam shel Torah seinu agdai. Understand that the source of Torah, and understand this now better according to the way that I'm explaining it. Ma'od nala mikol ha'lamais. The Torah is starting in a very, very high place. By the way, that's not true of tzitzis. Tzitzis are starting here. The Hashem said, make yourself tzitzis, but the Torah is starting in a very high place. We all know Istako Baraisu Baralma. Rashis, but let's use his words here. It's the rashis. It's the beginning. V'shirish atzilus kodshai yisbarach. It is the shirish of the atzilus. Read that carefully. Not that the Torah comes from the world of atzilus. Atzilus Bria Yitzir Asir is already accessible. We're talking about the shirish atzilus kodshai yisbarach. This is where the worlds begin. When Hashem decided to create his world, when he created trees and donkeys and all that, first he created Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. All started with the light of the Torah. The Or Ein Sof came about in the Torah. That's why, by the way, I just want to remind you that I don't know what it means by Torah at that point. I don't know if it means Vaydaber Hashem Moshe or not. But we know that Kol Oisios Shalat Torah, the way we see Torah, black on white, ink on parchment. So that's all those Oisios, Kol Oisios Shalat Sefer Torah, Kishemois Shalat Kadosh Baruch Hu. What does it mean? Those are manifestations of the Torah that's in Shemayim. I don't know in the Torah in Shemayim there's like Ya'amod and the Balkara, and we're reading it that way. So the Torah is Rashis v'Shiris Atzilus Kodshei Yisbarach. Listen to this very carefully. Soid, if you want to understand where Torah is in the whole chain there, it's the Soid Hamalbush Ha'elyon. Now I'm going to be a little daring here. The Soid Hamalbush Ha'elyon. Everyone says, well, what the heck is that? K'moshe Kasav Rabbeinu Isho Alekim Noira. Ha'arizal. It's an unusual Rabbeinu Isho Alekim Noira Ha'arizal. That's where it is. It's the Malbush, says the Arizal. Rak, the only thing is with the Torah, even though it comes from such a high place as the Malbush, Rak shenishtal shla v'yarda kivyachol ad la'aretz asher ha'ira mikvaydei. But this Malbush Elyon works its way down into this world, which can then be illuminated, mikvayda, umasra v'nata hu yisbarach b'seichenu. Not only that, he embedded the Torah within you and me, Shenia hanachnu hamachzikim v'toimchim be'etz hachaim. We can hold on to the Eitz Hachaim. Eitz Hachaim is this chain. When the Chaim Vital wrote the Eitz Chaim, he's writing about this chain. He uses the metaphor of a tree. I'm using the Arizal says a lot about chains, so we have a mixed metaphor. L'zois shmeaz, and from that time on, kol chiyusa v'kiyumam shel ha'olamais kulam tolui v'oimed rak kefi inyan v'roiv eskenu v'hegyonenu ba. There's no Eitz Chaim, there's no life, there's no world. The world will just be closer to Tov Vavo, unless there's somebody out there that's learning some Torah. If we learn Torah properly, without any weakness, we are adding a link onto the chain, which goes all the way up, and we're creating more of creation. And what happens then is lahamshich ulaharek toisefes bracha v'chaye olam. Chaye olam, not tabasechenu, yeah? Chaye olam, not tabasechenu. We're actually bringing more life into the world because we're bringing more purity and more goodness. And kol olam l'fi'ar kedusha sheyuchal l'kabel l'yisrael. So let's go. Let's take a deep dive here for a second. And Lefia Sogoseinu tried to understand what the Malbush Elyon is. Understanding is the wrong word. We can only understand all according to Masha. But we know that these worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yitzir, Asiya, I've often explained it as a sort of an assembly line which starts from Atzilus, which is just a machshava, just let's say an idea, lamashal that an engineer can have or an inventor could have, all the way down to the factory output in China. Atzilus, Bria, Yitzir, Asiya, all the different stages that everything in this world has to go through. Above all that is Hashem. We don't have any asaga in Hashem. We don't have any asaga. We don't know. Like, I shouldn't fool ourselves. That's why you're not allowed to imagine what Hashem looks like, or like, we don't know. We just don't know. Like, it seems to be okay. It seems to be okay that we can worship something we don't understand. It seems to okay. I think Rav Nachman said it deeper, like, who would worship something I do understand? Rav Nachman Breslover said, but we see somehow or another, like, who says you have to understand it with your brain? You understand it with your heart. And we understand that there's Hashem in this world. It's basic emunah. It's not scientific. So we don't understand the Melech. And then there's these worlds. The Melech, let's just understand the mashal that the Rizal is giving us. The Melech is wearing a malbush. So sometimes you can't understand, or even see the person because his clothing is blocking him on all different kinds of levels. But you can see the clothing. Like the malbush of Hashem, we can see. And Torah, interestingly, comes from that malbush. So does that, I'm just saying, like, Chazal are giving a mashal. Obviously, it's not God wearing clothes, but in other words, even if we can't understand, let's take it in human terms, even if we can't understand the man, we can see his malbush. Even if, right, that is, and that's where the Torah is coming. So the Torah becomes what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is using, and which creates the malbushes. Think the malbush of Adam Arishan and Chava Kosnais, or to begin with was with an aleph, with light. The malbush was emanating the light of the Torah. Okay, we can understand that, but let me explain something about this. In the Sefer HaTanya, Parak Dalet, sorry. In the Sefer HaTanya, Parak Dalet at the end, and I'll take this opportunity I have a number of versions of the Tanya, but Rav and Spiritual gifted me this version of the Tanya, and this is called Mesiloi Sefer HaTanya. Highly recommended. It's a pirush on the Tanya by Rav Pinchas Friedman. Huh?
Shiur suggestion.
Very good. So the Tanya says like this, and this part, the without the pirush, like, thank God I learned it Balpeh as a child, and that's how I remembered it. It's interesting, you can learn something Balpeh as a child and not understand a word of what you're learning, but when a Sekum Sabanutz, when you have to understand it, you understand it a little bit. Okay, there's a recall. So he says as follows, he's talking about the whole Parak Dalet is talking about the levushim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So he says, Avsha HaTorah nislabsha, this is the very end of Parak Dalet, Avsha HaTorah nislabsha b'dvarim tachtonim gashmiyim. The fact is, we look at the Torah and we say, Torah, like, take out a Sefer Torah, take out a Gemara. What's Torah? Shaar shenagach hasapara. That's Torah. Barbashus harabim. Tefillin mezuzahs. So he says, Avsha Torah nislabsha b'dvarim tachtonim gashmiyim. Hareza, I'm just going to read you his words. Hareza kimachabek es hamelech derech mashal. She'ein hefresh. It's like if you would be hugging the king. This is the mashal of the Balatanya. Machabek es hamelech. She'ein hefresh b'malasis karvusay dveikusay b'melech. Bein mechabkoi kishu lavush lavush echad. Bein shu lavush kama lavush. If you're hugging the king, if you get to hug the king, so whether he's wearing one lavush or two lavushim, the point is you're hugging the king. That is the king. That is the king. So in terms of that, there's no difference. Ein hefresh. B'malas his karvusa. If I'm hugging the king, the issue is not what he's wearing, how many lavushim he has. Shein hefresh b'malas his karvusa dv'kusay b'melech bein mechapkoi kishu lavush lavush echad bein shu lavush kama lavushim. Me'acher sheguf hamelech b'toichem. The king is in there, and you're hugging the king. V'chein im hamelech mechabkoi b'sroya. Now, think deeply for a second. Balatani is making a distinction between you hugging the king and the king hugging you. You hear this, Yisachar? The king, the melech comes and embraces you, even though the king is wearing his malbushim, his clothing. It says in Shir Hashirim, V'yaminoi ticha bekeni. Shlomo HaMelech said, I was hugged by the right hand of HaKadosh Baruch. Shehi HaTorah shenitna b'yamin. Because Torah is called the Yamin, as it says in Dvarim Lamed Gimel Pasuk Beis. Miminoi eishtos lamoi. Yeah. Shehi b'chenidas chesed umayim. Let me explain. What I don't know if we could talk about etzem hadavar, but we can speak about the mashal. The mashal is the melech has a lavush. The lavush is called Torah. When I do Torah, this is what he says. When I do mitzvahs, let's start there. So I'm mechabek the king. When I learn Torah, the king is hugging me. It means to say, usually when you hug somebody, you want to get a reaction, yeah? I hug you, hug me back. Otherwise, you're hugging a tree. Negative experience. So when we do mitzvahs, we're giving HaKadosh Baruch Hu a hug, and he's in there. But when we learn Torah, look what's happening here. The Torah is coming more into the world. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's tznu'ah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's outreach. And since it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's outreach, it's a lot more, not just meaningful, but it's actually the creation itself. So when we do this, Baltanya's brilliant mashal, the difference between Torah and mitzvahs is whether Hashem is hugging us or whether we're hugging Hashem. Both good. Both good. But one is Hashem extending the creation, and one is us embracing the creation. And this Daila Chakima Baramisa is the whole Indian of the Kruvim and the Mishkan, etc.
That's Nasa Shuta the Kadosh Baruch Hu B'Maisa Bereshis. But you're bringing that hug into the world.
That's right. You're bringing a degree of love into the world. Look, let me take it a step further. Remember, this is all mushal. I get carried away with it, but like, just to take it a little bit further, we know the difference between being hugged and feeling the love of another person. We know the difference. We know what it is to hug someone and not get hugged back. So I'll tell you something that the Hasidic Sfarim bring also from the Zohar, just before I go into Etzem Adavar, that there's a concept, and these are concepts that keep them, write them down. There's a concept called hiskaplus halavush. To continue with the Maranaim says this. It talks a lot about these kaplus halavush. He talks about this on Tisha B'Av when he speaks about sinas chinam. So that means that the malbush of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hainu the Torah, hainu the or of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, drapes down into this world. Gewalt. If we learn Torah, but we don't act like mention, so then we've created a halal where, yes, the levush of the Torah of Hashem, the malbush of Hashem, literally, is coming. He's hugging us, but his kaplus, let's say, the beged folds up and therefore is not draping to the ground. It loses its drape. That's what happens. This is exactly the scenario, I believe the Maranaim says this, of Beis Hamikdash, Bayis Sheni, where we had a bias. Now, when we have a Beis Hamikdash, it means Hashem is extending his or to us. But the sinas chinam created his kaplus habeged. It got folded up. Hence, in that space of his kaplus, in that space was the Chorban Beis Hamikdash. Davar chashiv liyamenu, meaning that it's a basic menschlichkeit, which is the biggest simon. Like my Rebbe always said that if a person learns Torah and there's no midos tovos, like, I have nothing with that Torah. If the Torah doesn't manifest itself as a mensch, if the person's not a mensch, then no Indian to be machabed. Scholar, there's no Indian to be machabed. A gadol is a mensch. Gadol b'Torah is a mensch. Let me share something with you from the Zohar. I only have a few minutes, so bear with me. There was Chavakuk Hanavi. The Zohar says that Chavakuk is a lashon chibuk. Two chibuks, Chavakuk. The story with him, the Navi Chavakuk, the Zohar explains, is that he was hugged twice. Because he was hugged twice. Because he was the son, the product of the Tchias HaMesim of Haisha Mishunam, the Isha Shunamis. You can go there if you're brave. It's a Sunam, and you can still see the inn that the Isha Shunamis was in, and she begged Elisha, it was the Talmud of Eliyahu Navi, she begged Elisha to ask Hashem to grant her a child. And he said to her after she davened, and he davened, he said, Leis hazois, b'moyed zeh, in a year from now at this time, you will be hugging a child. That's the lashon of the pasuk. I looked up the lashon here exactly.
At choveket ben.
Yeah. L'moyed hazeh ke'es chaya iti at chovekes ben. Thank you very much. Malachim beis, Perek Daled. Okay, so that's what happened. A year later, she was hugging a child. And then the child died. And Elisha came back. And what does the pasuk say here? That Elisha came and he davened for the child. He was Mechaye Mesim. And the lashon is that Elisha hugged the child and he came to life. So the child's name was appropriately Chavakuk. A chibuk from his mother and a chibuk from the Navi. The first chibuk was the chibuk of newborn baby. The second chibuk was a chibuk of Tchias HaMesim. That's what it says in the Zohar. Okay. What happens? Why is the chibuk so important here? Two chibukim. That it goes into the name of the Navi, because the chibuk is in the Baal Tanya, like doesn't talk about this, but he talks about that when you learn Torah, Hashem is giving us a chibuk. When we do mitzvahs, we're giving Hashem a chibuk, and the malbush is not the important thing here. Although, I brought this down. If you'll stick with me for a minute here. If you look at the, if you're a little bit Hasidish, and on Friday night you say the Azamer.
It's 10 o'clock.
The Azamer B'Shvachen. Amer B'Shvachen L'Meil Goy Peschen. So here it says, describes Shabbos. First of all, just give me 2 more minutes if you don't mind. We welcome the Shabbos b'pseira chadata with challah, ubimnarta tafta, the nara oration, and with neiros. Miyamino smolo benaya kala. Think chuppah, says the Arizal wrote this. Think chuppah yamino smolo benayu kala. 2 parents walking down their daughter down to the chuppah. Bekishutanazla, she goes with jewelry. Umanin ulavushin, she has beautiful clothing. Yechabek la bala ubiyasoida dila da'avid naichalaye katish katishin. And then there's the chibuk. This is all a mashal to our relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ayin sham. Why we're katish katishin. But what it means is manin ulavushin. The Arizal explains himself. Shem Chavdal Itim Kishutin L'Choyim Yeshua Yechabek LaBala Hu HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kishim Yisyachidim Yisrael Ba'ava Aza Yosei Ratzon Shal Knesset Yisrael David Naichala, and whatever we need, he's happy to do. So I'm saying this Indian of chibuk, just just to understand it, to take it out of its gashmius for a minute, the Indian of chibuk is where I'm taking myself and I'm embracing you, and I'm surrounding you and I'm taking care of you. The Indian of being hugged is Hashem is taking care of us. So, what happens here is that when we do mitzvahs, we're reaching out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the chibuk of us. But then, the Yechabik Labala is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu reaches out for us, he embraces us, and the Indian of an embrace is that, don't worry, I will take care of you. I will do everything you need. So when we learn Torah, Hashem embraces us. You know that one of the Hasidic Svarim explained that a sukkah has to have 3 walls because a hug has 3 sides to it. There's your body, there's your arm, and then there's your hand. That's how a chibuk takes place. So a sukkah is a chibuk of those that are inside. And that's why the 3rd wall only has to be a tefach. And they go so far as to explain what's a sukkah. B'mavua, you can learn the whole Masechta Sukkah with this mahalach. But to sum it up, because we're out of time, there's so much more to say. We've only scratched the surface. But to sum it up, Chavakuk had the both hugs. The hug of Tchias HaMesim is a continuum of the Bria. Yeah, that's how the Bria keeps on going to a whole other step. That's through the Navi, Hashem hugged the child. That was the second hug. The first hug was the hug of the Yetzirah, where the mother hugged him. So I leave you with this, with the Nefesh Hachaim, with the Tanya Parak Daled, with the Zayar by Chavakuk, with the Zmiris Azamer B'Shvachin, and then we'll continue next week. I wish everybody a good Shabbos. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Shabbos, good Shabbos.
Thank you so much.
Shabbos, Kaya, Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a very good Shabbos.
We should sing Azamer B'Shvachin at the Kiddush this week. Yeah, maybe. We should come to the Kiddush this week. All right. Zaygas and be well, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Shabbos.